You know Mark Twain, celebrated American author, known for classic works such as The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He grappled with the technological shift brought about by the typewriter. In the late 1800s, Mark Twain was an early adopter of the typewriter. He was among the first big authors to start using the machine for his writing. Imagine the huge technological change for these writers. But as you may imagine, his experience with this newfangled technology was not without its difficulties. According to historical accounts, Twain had very mixed feelings about the typewriter. He really appreciated its efficiency and speed, but he also found it really challenging to adapt to the mechanical nature of this device. He reportedly struggled with the rigid structure imposed by the typewriter because it contrasted with the fluidity and comparative spontaneity of handwritten drafts. Twain once remarked about these struggles, humorously stating that the typewriter was a machine that enables authors to do their own typing, especially authors who can't. Now, this humorous quip reflects both his acknowledgement of the benefits of the typewriter and the frustration he felt in adjusting to the constraints of this new high-technology writing tool. Despite his initial challenges with it, Twain continued to use a typewriter and eventually became quite the advocate for its practicality. The efficiency it offered in terms of producing legible and consistent manuscripts maybe outweighed his initial reservations. But did it really? Twain's experience serves as a super interesting historical anecdote which highlights the complexities and adjustments writers have faced during transitions from one technology or no technology to another. I really think that the shift from handwriting to typing or using computers has brought about significant changes in the writing process for authors, and I think it's important for us to be really crystal clear on what those changes are. It may feel a little bit obvious, like, oh yeah, computers definitely make it that much faster for us, but the truth is, there are some authors who refused to use a typewriter or a computer and instead had secretaries, perhaps, typing out their handwritten manuscripts, and there may be a reason for that. You might think that this whole question of pen and paper versus technology is not that important, but actually I think it really is, because writing a book is not an easy process. It's something that's full of trial and error. It's full of resistance and blocks, and the more you can do to actually make that process as tailored to the way your brain works as possible is going to really help you to move forward in your writing career faster and less painfully than you ever thought possible. So this is really something where I'm trying to get you to find the wonderful parts of your brain and how it works that are different and that help you to exploit your own unique voice, and to do that without too many impediments blocking your way, whether those impediments are mental, emotional, psychological, or technological. So in this episode of the How to Be an Author podcast, we're going to be talking about the difference between handwriting and typing or using a device for writers. And it's not such a cut and dried thing. It's not just that you can produce cleaner, more legible manuscripts, etc., with something that has more technology. There are some huge advantages to the technology, and there are some things that each author really knows how to do. And let me tell you, I have some authors who are really technologically challenged, and I'll tell you about my experiences with them as a writing coach. But I would like us to talk about some of the things that you definitely should be using technology for as an author, writing, publishing, and promoting your book, and some of the things that you might consider doing the old-fashioned way. pen to paper. Get ready because this is going to be an eye-opening episode that uses elements of brain science and just good old-fashioned common sense to talk about the best ways to write, ideate, draft, publish, and promote a book using the best of technology and traditional means. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karenna Akavane, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. Hello, and welcome to the How to Be an Author podcast. I am your host, writing coach Karenna Akavane. It is my passion in life to help authors like you go from aspiring to successful, and I use just about every possible means to get you there. And one of my most popular ways of getting authors from their idea to a published and marketed book is through my course, From Idea to Published in 6 months. Now, this course has, of course, elements of technology, but it also has a downloadable notebook or workbook because as a writing coach, I firmly believe that some things are best done by hand, pen to paper, the old-fashioned way. And you may be thinking, okay, why is this? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. Whether you do my course or whether you are going it on your own, there are things that are best done with pen and paper and a good old-fashioned notebooks, and then things that you will want to up your tech skills for. So let's talk about the pros and cons of some of this technology that we now have at our fingertips for writing our books. Obviously, writing speed is much improved when you're using a computer, right? You can produce these manuscripts, and actually I have to say, if you want to go one step further in your technology, you can be going with my dictation technique, which really helps you to write at least 5,000 words an hour. I did 13,000 words the other day. Are they horrible? Yes, many of them are, but this is 13,000 words that I didn't have before and that I can now edit. It really helps your mindset. It helps you with moving forward and having momentum. It helps you to write more naturalistic dialogue. So I would say that dictation is maybe this new technology, new, that you might want to embrace, but it's not perfect for everything, right? So with computers, you can edit, revise, rearrange text with ease. You can also edit and collaborate with your editor. You can use spell check, grammar check, you can do word counts, you can do formatting, you can store your stuff in, some different folders on different devices, and you can use your computer for research and for self-publishing, communicating with readers, creative exploration, making your own cover, and much, much more. Now, here's the thing. Many authors that I work with are not super technologically savvy. I believe, and this might be a very unpopular opinion, but I was talking to an author the other day who was like, oh, great, can we get this project on the road? And mind you, this is an author that I've worked with many times before. We've gotten really far with their poetry work. And now she was saying, can I drive my manuscripts over to you because I don't know how to put them in a folder on my computer and send them to you. This is one example where not being technologically savvy in a most basic level really negatively impacts you. So what are some of the things that I think you need to do technologically as a writer? You need to know how to use a word processing program. You need to know how to do basic formatting. You need to know the shortcuts to writing and formatting. You need to know how to type at an okay speed. Some authors that I've seen, they're still doing hunt and peck. And these days, that is not okay. You're not saving any time if you're hunting and pecking. If you're actually going more slowly than if you're handwriting, that's not your sign that you should be handwriting all the time. It's your sign that you should be practicing your typing a little bit. Not just for speed, but also for ideas to flow from your mind to the page without getting stuck as you look for the letter P. So that's really important. Another thing that I think you really need to know how to do is you need to know how to use social media. You need to know how to edit photos. You need to know how to use hashtags. All of these things are based on technology and on where we're going with things that people are doing with their computers or with their phones. And if you don't know how to do this, you're going to be left behind. I have some authors that I've taught to use things like TikTok when before they were really, really intimidated. I've taught them how to use, the basic editing, how to do video, how to do images. And all of this has helped them to feel much more invested in their own book promotion. And they don't have to wait for somebody to come and help them when they want to do the most basic thing. I think that's really important. Also, using things like AI or using things like, Photoshop to do, a rudimentary version of your own book cover so that you can communicate with people as to what you want. I think that's really crucial. So think about all of those things. And also, some people don't even know how to use Google. I know that sounds really silly, but some writers I know are not great at researching. And I think you need to know how to do that. And doing things like self-publishing, it's pretty simple. Just by Googling how to do it, you should be able to do this. And I do have a step-by-step, obviously, in my From Idea to Published in 6 months, because I feel that if you're paying somebody to format your book and upload your book to self-publish it, you're wasting money. This is something that you should be able to do as an author. And I don't want you to be held back or to spend money that you don't have on things that you could be doing yourself. So remember, the transition to different types of technology, it's not easy, but it does make you more successful when you're able to deal with these things on your own. But now, conversely, let's talk about how writing things down by hand, pen to paper, can really lead to more success. I love to do a hybrid approach when I'm writing. I always have pens and notebooks. I collect them. It's kind of a problem, but I think that that's really important to do as well. If you're only counting on your devices and your screens to write your book and promote your book, I think you might be missing out. Now, one other situation where I think that putting pen to paper is really useful is actually when you're editing your work. Now, it may feel like you're going to save a lot of time by editing online, especially, tracking changes or using suggestions, things like that. And when I edit a client's work, I usually will do it that way. I'll do it online just because this way we're not wasting any time. I'm getting paid by the hour. I'm tracking my changes, and they can see where I marked these places that need to be fixed. But see, the tracking changes thing operates a little bit like a red pen because it makes that change visible and you get to think about it and scroll through and find it. Now, when I'm editing or self-editing for myself, I definitely print out a copy of my manuscript, double-spaced, and I will go through it with a red pen. It really helps me to see the spots where I've changed things, and it helps me to scribble things into the margins and make marks without thinking of it too much. And I'm not sitting there and moving the cursor, which can take you a lot longer. I feel like doing this and then going back and implementing those changes in my word processing program actually isn't that time wasting when you really think about it. Now, this might not work for you, but for me, this is the thing that I've discovered is the best hybrid approach when it comes to my best method of editing my own work. So let's talk about this brain science behind why writing things down by hand can make you that much more successful. First of all, they say that when writing down your goals, this is amazing. The psychology of writing down goals is incredible. It is so simple, but if you go to any goal setting workshop, the person doing the workshop will tell you that you need to write them down. You can use a list, you can use a vision board, whatever, but it's really important to put them in writing. And so what's this psychology, right? Why should you write your goals down? It's because first of all, if you have no goals, you're not going to move forward very well. If you have goals and you don't write them down, there's a Harvard study that found that, okay, if you have goals but you don't write them down, you're still 10 times more likely to succeed than people without any goals. That's kind of obvious. But if you write down your goals, you are 3 times more likely to succeed than people who had a plan but didn't write it down. Isn't that interesting? So, if you're just thinking but not writing, your goal isn't concrete. It's not down on paper, or it's not set in stone in a way, right? A vivid written description of your goal helps you to picture it, and it helps you to, see the different steps. And also, there's more of a potential that you are going to show that goal to people if you write it down, or that you're going to revisit it if you write it down. And I think that that is so interesting because it really does help to make you more successful. So when you have writing goals, definitely I would say, don't keep those things in your head. Definitely write them down, and write them down on paper. You can then have a version online, that's fine, but I think it's crucial. Pen to paper, it's just a really interesting, process that solidifies things for people. So writing things down definitely clears your mind. Apparently, we have like 6,000 thoughts a day. So it makes sense that we can feel overwhelmed or stressed, or when you think of something you need to do, or that, you're like, I had this great idea. Yeah, I'm going to remember it later. You know what? That's such a lie. We don't remember all of these thoughts, even if they're good ones. So if you had a little notebook with you and that you could write down everything from to-do lists to those ideas to a daily reflection or a mantra or an affirmation, releasing the things you're containing in your head is like literally lifting a weight off your shoulders. That's one of those benefits of writing things down. And instead of, okay, you could grab your phone and put it in the notes. I do that a lot, I admit, but I think that glare from the screen definitely doesn't help us. And also, I think that when you write things down by hand, it forces you to focus on one idea at a time a little bit better. And then you can actually dedicate the time that you need for each thought. You can then flesh it out. And it's easier to flesh it out when it's written down. It's just a little bit more clear. And you can do mind mapping. You can do, thought bubbles. It really helps to clarify. For example, you've got goals, hopes, dreams, and you write them down. But when they're on paper and you can expand on them, you can also reorder them. And yes, you can do this on a device, but it's just more organic doing it by hand. I love seeing these little charts. You know what I mean? And then when you document your process, especially if you put things in a notebook, it really helps you to flip through manually and see progress. So I kind of love that, right? Journal entries are another thing that people do by hand. There's been a lot of studies that show that writing in a journal by hand is actually much more effective than writing it, on a device. And it helps your brain grow. It makes these more neural connections. Also, I think that when you're putting the pen to paper, the fact that there's this more physical aspect of actually forming the letters and we're forced to slow down a tiny bit, I think it becomes a little bit more intentional. And that's pretty interesting. So the generation effect is what neuropsychologists call it, when you're creating information for yourself. And so you're writing it down and you're taking your time. This helps you to remember things better because you're actually, as you're writing by hand, you're having to sift through information and you're having to slowly put it down, focus on it as you're writing, and more so than when your fingers are just kind of flying over the keys. And that really helps you to keep things in mind and have it in the forefront of your brain. Also, what's super fun when you're writing it by hand, especially if it's a goal or something that you wanted to do, it's literally crossing it off the list, right? Instead of deleting it or putting a little X in front of it, which is what I do when I do it digitally, crossing that item off your to-do list really feels so good. And also sometimes tearing up a page feels really cathartic. I kind of love it, right? So there's been some research done that says that handwriting engages the brain more than typing. There was a recent side-by-side comparison of paper notebooks versus mobile digital devices, and they used neuroimaging to identify brain activation during memory retrieval, and they showed that the memory encoding and retrieval were much more robust on paper. If you were doing handwriting, especially if you're doing like a schedule or you're doing steps, it can actually, oddly enough, be faster and more accurate than using something more digital. And what's interesting though is if you have a digital document and you use different colors, shapes, highlights, things like that, then in that case, you're starting to mimic some of the memory encoding benefits of handwritten notebooks, but it takes a longer time. Right. So that's really interesting. That personalized flair that you put in your handwritten note, the star, the little thought bubble, whatever. I think that's really, really interesting. So think about that when you're thinking about how you're writing and how you're planning your book, how you're planning your plot, how you're planning your marketing or promotional strategy. That's really, really key. You know, some of my writers, when they're writing down the characteristics of their characters, they'll remember them better when they've written them by hand. And this is why in my course, From Idea to Publish in 6 Months, I have so many worksheets that you can fill out. I think that it really helps also with the creativity and idea generation. That tactile experience of writing by hand, it actually stimulates creativity and idea generation. There's this interesting kinesthetic feedback from writing on paper that fosters a deeper connection to content. Who knew? And handwriting can be more focused, less distracting. So better comprehension, better concentration, and maybe being able to focus on your creativity. So that's really, really interesting when you think about that. So you might be wondering to yourself, okay, what is the best, hybrid approach? Because I'm not going to write my whole book on paper. That's not happening, especially if I want to collaborate, especially if I want this document to be portable and I don't want to lose it. I want to be able to edit it. I want to go fast. What do? I find that a hybrid approach definitely is beneficial. So how do I break it out? Now, everyone's different. But I think that there are so many things that are best on paper, and then, of course, the other things that are best digitally. So first, note-taking and drafting. I really think it's so great to do that in handwritten notes and later transfer them to digital. I think that that's really, really one of the most useful things. I love doing mind maps. I love drawing little octopi with bubbles of ideas. And I love there's like the snowflake method where you can do different levels of growing your story. You can do the clothesline approach. All of these things are much more tactile. You can even use Post-it notes, stick them to a wall or something. That's really fun for that free form brainstorming and mind mapping. The visual and spatial aspect of paper really helps you to explore and connect ideas. Another thing I think is really key is doing character sketches and plot outlines. Literally, I will do like a story arc. I will draw an arc on paper, and it really helps me to develop this more organic and detailed narrative, and also like character traits. Sometimes I'll literally sketch the character. You can do this also with AI or, Art Breeder or something like that. I like to use those things, but I think it's really cool to write down these characteristics of your characters. And then storyboarding, you get this tangible representation of your book's flow. That's awesome. And definitely for journaling, because writing, it's a holistic thing, right? You're not just writing your plot. You're probably having a lot of thoughts and emotions that are cropping up. And I say that journaling in parallel with writing your book, writing about more personal stuff and your personal reflections, your emotions, those raw emotions are best captured in a handwritten journal. And also, I think that later they can maybe be incorporated into your work, but also just getting them out and being able to focus and writing by hand and not feeling like you're putting them on this impersonal digital device, that really helps. Now, sometimes I think that when you're doing also promotional materials, I think is really fun. Or if you're doing a website, I think that doing a wireframe of those, a design concept on paper, it makes it so much easier and so much freer. And then, of course, you're going to transfer it to, of course, a digital tool, and so that you can finalize it. But I think that that's really massive. It's so cool because you get to be just that much more organic and you're not being limited by your technical ability. That's really important. I also think that marketing, content calendars, for example, social media grids, strategies Writing also maybe an email sequence. You can work these out much better by hand. At least that's my personal feeling about the thing. And then, of course, once we're trying to manage our accounts and everything else, we're obviously doing all of this in the digital realm, but I think that it's the cognitive processes that are related to writing and promoting that are important to look at, because the more help you can give yourself, the better, right? Having this flexible approach that combines the strengths of both mediums, the paper and the digital, can be super beneficial during the whole writing and promotional process. I think that's massive. So remember these things about the neural pathways that you are influencing through handwriting. Remember the fact that when you're writing notes or drafts by hand, that tactile feedback and motor movements are activating sensory motor regions in your brain. Remember also that if you want to quickly capture thoughts, you might be thinking about the typing or the dictation. That's important. But remember that there's neural activation, and we need all the brain power we can get. That's really, really important. The journaling, I feel that brainstorming of the prefrontal cortex is going to be more activated with the handwriting. So important. But sometimes brainstorming on a digital platform with zero barrier, that can be a cool alternative thing. So see what works best for you, right? That can be really, really interesting. And just remember that in terms of neuroplasticity, which is super important for you to maintain as an author who's going to have a nice, long career, you want to keep looking at which tools work best for you and what's coming on the scene in terms of new technologies that you can actually engage to help you to, network, to write, to create more multimedia stuff, to engage with people all over the world. Remember that you need to keep learning and growing as you go, and that this is a dynamic thing. Your creative process might change over time, so keep exploring what works best. But for now, I definitely believe very strongly that hybrid approach is going to be your best bet. So whether you're doing from idea to published in 6 months, and you're doing the video learning, and you're doing also your workbooks, or whether you are on a strict budget and you're doing DIY author, which also has a bunch of journaling exercises and workbook exercises, I really want you to try to practice to incorporate that good old-fashioned writing tool called the pen and the paper and see how that works for you. I think it's done wonders for me, and I would love to hear from you. You can reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com, or you can check out those programs on onlineCoursesForWriters.com. And I look forward to being with you next week on the How to Be an Author podcast. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.